quarter makes it goes for the super art? Ooh. One combo can end this round right now.
Just a sneeze.
A super art? In there!
Ha, they ain't getting up.
Street Fighter 6 is an incredible fighting game dripping with confidence. You get the feeling that even Capcom knows that Street Fighter 5 was somewhat undercooked. Despite an excellent fighting game engine, the sequel to the incredible fighting game renaissance that was Street Fighter 4 was a letdown when it was released last generation. While subsequent releases would smooth the edges so that by the time the 5 era was done, it was a solid game with plenty of content, Street Fighter 5 was a lean package at launch. Street Fighter 6 already feels like Super Street Fighter 6. There's an interesting juxtaposition in Street Fighter 6 where it wants to be as open as possible to new players via the new limited input modern control scheme, and also wants to encourage players to learn more about the competitive side of fighting games via the in-game commentary. Whereas Street Fighter 5 seemed so focused on being part of that competitive edge of the fighting game community, Street Fighter 6 stops and wonders if perhaps they should actually engender a new generation towards the hobby. Jumping into a match, if you're familiar with the series, you won't be too taken aback. In fact, you'll probably be able to mash out a few old reliable combos. However, it was once we got to grips with the drive impact that our fun really started. These attacks can absorb enemy attacks, making them ideal for breaking up the enemy offense and can turn the tide of battle instantly. They're also such a visual flex, something the game is full of. Street Fighter 6 is beautiful with fluid, readable action and a colour palette that makes it one of the most visually striking games of the year. It's matched by a great soundtrack, giving the whole game an unimpeachable sense of style that you will want to engage with endlessly. The game is split into 3 main sections: the Fighting Ground, the Battle Hub and the World Tour. Beginning with the Fighting Ground, this is where you're going to find your traditional arcade modes, your local battles and your training modes too. Arcade mode sees each fighter travel around the game's various stages, taking on their rivals, and in the bonus stage an actual truck, in order to chase a high score. These arcade modes don't have cutscenes associated with them, instead opting for motion comic panels to open and close them. They remain a great way to get to grips with a character, and the gentle increase in difficulty as you progress can make it a solid way to flex against the game's more complex mechanics, if you feel yourself inclined to get to grips with the technical side of Street Fighter 6, but they're not the single player highlight of the game by some distance. That goes to the second section, the hugely impressive World Tour. World Tour is part education on the history of Capcom fighting games, part RPG and part slapstick comedy. You create a custom fighter, the limits of which are seemingly bound only by what the game's physics engine can handle, and then you're sent into Metro City. You'll encounter legends from the history of Street Fighter, each of which will teach you their moves, which you can then build into your own custom fighter's moveset. This alone would be a fine single player component, but it's just not a case of moving from stage to stage fighting the same characters from the main game. World Tour is populated with hundreds of custom characters, almost any of which can be fought, many of whom have rewards associated with beating them in a certain way. It's all a bit overwhelming. The writing is also genuinely hilarious, with an obvious love for the history of Capcom's library, even outside of fighting games. It's hugely stylish and knows exactly what kind of tone it's trying to strike. For example, as soon as you learn certain moves from the Street Fighter cast, you can use them out in the street. So if you wander past some middle manager on the way to work, you can simply uppercut them 15 feet into the air to start a fight. Rather than phoning the police, they're more than happy to throw down. While you can start fights the honourable way too, it never stops being rib-splittingly funny to approach some random person going to their work and kick them in the back of the head so hard that a single tooth goes flying off into the distance. Then straight after it, they'll shake your hand and give you a reward. Sure, they might never be able to blow their nose again, and they'll probably snore like a dying horse for the rest of their life, but that's the love of the fight. The final area of the game, the Battle Hub, ties together the game's online modes. We had some opportunity to try this area during the review period, and while we weren't able to try it as extensively as the other sections of the game, our experience so far has been smooth, and the modes appear to be fully featured. You can even play a few old Capcom classics while you wait for your friends to come online and kick your head in. Street Fighter 6 has a cast of 18, which is made up of 6 new characters, 4 classics from across the franchise, and the original World Warriors. The cast has a nice variety to it, and the new characters fit in well to the point where we had to guess if one or two of them were actually returning fighters from some obscure revision. There will be calls of why isn't X in it, but considering the Royal Rumble size rosters that these games will eventually grow to, 18 is a very strong start. Street Fighter 6 is an incredibly confident and joyous fighting game. The cast is varied and vibrant. The changes to the fighting engine make for a game that epitomizes the easy to learn, difficult to master adage. Street Fighter 6 would be a great game if it was just that, but throw in the incredibly impressive World Tour and the strides the game makes to help players take their first step into the more competitive side of the game, and it's an amazing package. With the 3 titans of the fighting game space all releasing mainline entries this year, competition is going to be stiff, but Capcom is putting its best foot forward. The publisher's incredible run continues with one of the most feature-rich, stylish, and enjoyable entries in franchise history. We give Street Fighter 6 5 out of 5.